This is AP News Minute. Republicans are expressing alarm after a briefing on reports that Russia paid militants to attack U.S. troops in Afghanistan. Democrats, to be briefed Tuesday, joined Republicans in demanding consequences for Russia. Arizona Governor Doug Ducey issued an executive order closing bars, nightclubs, and water parks. He also pushed back the start of the school year and urged Arizonans to wear a mask. A wind-driven wildfire killed one person and destroyed numerous homes in a remote California desert town. The fire forced the entire town of Nyland to evacuate. Dozens of people were displaced. A Boeing 737 MAX made a test flight from Seattle to central Washington state. The plane has been grounded since early last year after 2 fatal crashes. Rita Foley, The Associated Press, with AP News Minute. This is AP News Minute. New York City's council approved a plan to shift $1 billion from policing to education and social services. Nationwide calls to defund police came amid the protests that followed George Floyd's death. Colorado Democrats picked former Governor John Hickenlooper to challenge Republican Senator Cory Gardner. Amy McGrath was named winner of Kentucky's Democratic Senate primary. It was held last week. A wildfire in the mountains northeast of Tucson, Arizona is prompting evacuations. The fire has burned close to 180 square miles since lightning sparked it more than 3 weeks ago. Governor Tate Reeves signed a bill to retire the Mississippi state flag. It was the last state flag that bore the Confederate battle emblem. Rita Foley, The Associated Press, with AP News Minute.
The U.S. death toll from the COVID-19 pandemic has now topped 127,000 people. The epicenter has shifted to the west and the south, where cases have ballooned to record highs. Amna Nawaz has our report.
California's COVID response was once called a miracle for quickly stemming virus spread. But the state today took steps to move back into lockdown after new cases spiked almost 80% in the last 2 weeks.
The bottom line is the spread of this virus continues at a rate that is particularly concerning. 4th of July weekend has raised a lot of concern from our health officials. We want to again remind each and every one of you that if we want to be independent from COVID-19, we have to be much more vigilant.
California's not alone. A majority of states in the country are now reporting surges in infections. Yesterday, the U.S. recorded more than 47,000 new cases, the nation's highest single-day spike in the pandemic so far. To slow virus spread, at least 14 states are now moving to pause or reverse plans to reopen their economies. But the majority of states are still moving ahead on lifting restrictions, despite the rise in infections. Currently, only 17 states and the District of Columbia have issued mask mandates. And Texas is not one of them. In fact, Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick said in a Fox News interview last night that he doesn't need any advice from Dr. Anthony Fauci, the nation's top infectious disease expert.
Fauci said today that he's concerned about states like Texas that skipped over certain things. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Texas had one of the shortest stay-at-home orders in the nation and is now reversing reopening steps after a record number of new infections. Hospitals here, already stretched, are bracing for the weeks ahead.
The hospitals right now are operating with nearly 100% of intensive care unit beds occupied at several hospitals. If the community doesn't start behaving differently, there's going to be a limit to what the hospitals will handle. It's not today, that's 3 weeks from now.
In Phoenix today, Vice President Mike Pence met with Governor Doug Ducey as Arizona struggles to contain its spike in cases and puts a pause on reopening.
I know we'll get through this. I'm absolutely confident that with your leadership, with the full support of the federal government behind you, the cooperation of the people of Arizona, we'll slow the spread and we'll flatten the curve.
Meanwhile, in Washington, the Senate last night and the House today approved a 5-week extension on the Paycheck Protection Program for small businesses struggling to stay open with the stops and starts of state plans. Business owners like John Wen are left struggling to keep up with shifting plans, like Texas's recent reversal.
That definitely added a lot of complexity and stress to small business owners like me. We were hoping it would turn around by May, but now that everything is going in the wrong direction, it doesn't look like we're going to be over this anytime soon.
Plans on hold across the country as states scramble to stifle another swell of COVID-19 infections. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Amna Nawaz.
This is AP News Minute. Republican and Democratic Congress members are calling for more answers about the Russia-Afghanistan intelligence allegations. President Trump says he wasn't briefed on reports that Russia paid militants to attack U.S. troops. The number of coronavirus cases is rising quickly in India as that country struggles with the pandemic. More than 600,000 cases are reported in India, 100,000 of them in the past 4 days. California's confirmed coronavirus cases jumped 45% in 2 weeks. Governor Gavin Newsom shut down bars, wineries, museums, and inside restaurant dining. Delaware removed its last whipping post. Officials said it symbolized violence and racial discrimination. The post was used for lashings of alleged criminals. The practice was banned decades ago. Rita Foley, The Associated Press, with AP News Minute.
The latest headlines for you from BBC News. Amid protests in Hong Kong against the new security laws imposed by China, it's been announced that up to 3 million residents could be granted rights to live and work in the UK. Nearly 400 people were arrested, most for public order offences. Some face potentially a life sentence for calling for independence. Early official results seem to suggest that voters apparently will overwhelmingly approve Vladimir Putin's move to change the Russian constitution, would allow him to stay in power until 2036. First returns suggest a 3-to-1 majority. His critics see it as a blatant power grab. The White House has claimed that President Trump was never told by the US Secret Service about intelligence reports that Russia paid Taliban militants in Afghanistan a bounty for killing American soldiers. Senior congressional leaders are to be briefed by the directors of intelligence.
The U.S. House of Representatives on Wednesday passed a bill with unanimous consent, taking aim at China's new national security law for Hong Kong. The bill penalizes banks for doing business with Chinese officials who implement the national security law, which House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said, quote, signals the death of the one country, two systems principle, undermining the former British colony's freedoms. The measure reflects growing concern in Washington over the law, which has drawn international outcry, condemning the law as an end to the city's autonomy.
The law is a brutal, sweeping crackdown against the people of Hong Kong, intended to destroy the freedoms they were promised.
The bill is similar to a measure approved last week in the Senate. Under congressional rules, it must now return to the Senate and be passed there before being sent to President Donald Trump to sign into law or veto. The U.S. has already begun eliminating Hong Kong's special status under U.S. law, halting defense exports and restricting the territory's access to high-tech products.
You all alone now, last man. You are a Lone Ranger.
Yes, Tano. I am a Lone Ranger.
This American Western character invoked by President Donald Trump this week. After long resisting calls to wear a face mask in public, Trump now says he would wear one in certain situations, adding it makes him look like the Lone Ranger. On Thursday, he backed efforts by governors and local officials to get people back to the basics when it comes to containing the virus.
That includes face coverings, social distancing, testing, and personal hygiene. Wash your hands.
Earlier this month, Trump said some Americans wear masks to signal disapproval of him. Trump has not mandated people to wear face coverings, but his comment this week may reflect a small shift in tone.
One of the things I think we can expect from the president is that he will do what he often attempts to do rhetorically, which is play both sides just enough to give himself some wiggle room. I'm not sure, though, with the staying power of the narrative of the pandemic, if that is going to work in this particular instance.
The U.S. reported more than 52,000 new coronavirus cases on Wednesday, the largest single-day total since the start of the pandemic. With an 80% increase of new cases in the past 2 weeks, more Republican lawmakers have joined Democrats in urging Americans to wear masks.
It's the single most important thing you can do, not only to protect yourself, but protect others until we get a vaccine. Put on the mask. It's not complicated.
Unlike in some countries where masks are simply a health issue, Americans are politically divided. According to the latest Pew Research, 76% of Democrats say they wear a mask in public compared to 53% of Republicans. Presumptive Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden blames the president for this divide.
The president gives no direction, and he pits us against one another. We can't continue like this, half recovering and half getting worse. We can't continue, half wearing masks and half rejecting science.
Vice President Mike Pence has recently started wearing masks in public and encouraging their use. And White House officials continue to insist that Americans follow their local directives and make the best decision for their safety. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News, Washington.
This is AP News Minute. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer say President Trump needs to focus on reading intelligence briefings. Top Democrats and Republicans were briefed on reports that Russia paid militants in Afghanistan to attack U.S. forces. The White House says the president wasn't briefed earlier because the intelligence wasn't verified. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has ordered that masks be worn in public across most of the state. Texas is dealing with dramatically rising numbers of coronavirus cases and patients going to hospitals. At least 80 students living in fraternity houses near the University of Washington in Seattle report testing positive for COVID-19. The university says hundreds of students have been tested and many results are pending. And New Jersey's casinos have reopened, along with amusement rides and water parks. Governor Phil Murphy reminded visitors and residents to stick with coronavirus restrictions. Mike Hempen, the Associated Press, AP News Minute.
You're watching BBC World News with me, David Eads. The headlines. The UK government has announced it will remove quarantine restrictions for travellers to England if they're coming from lower-risk countries. Initially, the rules will apply to people travelling from Germany, France, Spain and Italy, but a list of more than 50 countries is due to be published later. US prosecutors have charged the British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell with grooming young girls for her former boyfriend, the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Maxwell has previously denied any wrongdoing. Texas is making the wearing of a face mask compulsory in public across much of the state as COVID-19 infections continue to soar. Across the US, a record 55,000 people have tested positive for the last 24-hour period. There's been an explosion and fire at Iran's main nuclear fuel production site. Authorities in Tehran say they're still investigating.
Ghislaine Maxwell's home sits at the end of a narrow half-mile dirt driveway. It's lined with no trespassing signs and barred by a padlocked metal fence. A stone stands near the gate with the words "tucked away." On Tuesday, Maxwell was arrested on charges she lured girls as young as 14 years old for the late and disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein to sexually abuse. Maxwell had been hiding out in style since December. A listing of her Massachusetts home said it had cathedral ceilings, a floor-to-ceiling fieldstone fireplace, and a wall of glass overlooking the 156-acre property. After her arrest, the FBI scorned her choice of getaway spot, a home that officials say she purchased for $1 million in cash.
We learned she had slithered away to a gorgeous property in New Hampshire, continuing to live a life of privilege while her victims live with the trauma inflicted upon them years ago. We moved when we were ready, and Ms. Maxwell was arrested without incident. Like Epstein, Ms. Maxwell chose to blatantly disregard the law and her responsibility as an adult, using whatever means she had at her disposal to lure vulnerable youth into behavior they should never have been exposed and which creates lasting harm.
Maxwell's home seems to have been secluded enough to keep her out of sight in Bradford, a small town of less than 2,000 people. Locals told Reuters they had no idea Maxwell was holed up nearby, and some said they had never seen her in town. Maxwell's arrest is the latest twist in Epstein's saga. He went from a former math teacher to high-flying investor, and was found hanged in a New York City jail last August in an apparent suicide while awaiting trial on federal charges of trafficking. Prosecutors on Thursday called Maxwell, who was Epstein's ex-girlfriend, one of his closest associates.